So why do we feel like there's this little demon inside us just pulling the strings?
Right. Yeah, that's the big question.
I mean, think about it. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you just said something completely out of character?
Oh, absolutely.
Like maybe you completely lost your temper over a minor email, or you sabotaged your own success right at the finish line.
Or navigated a toxic boss who just seems to absolutely thrive on creating unnecessary drama.
Exactly. And in the aftermath, when the dust settles, you sit back and wonder, who was that? Like, that wasn't me.
It's a completely universal experience, really.
Yeah.
We look at these sudden outbursts as self-destructive patterns, or even just the baffling behavior of the people around us, and we feel like we're harboring a total stranger inside of ourselves.
We really do. And we try to rationalize it, right?
Always. We blame the coffee we didn't drink, the traffic, or we just label the other person as inherently bad.
But those are just surface-level excuses.
They are. They really are.
And getting beneath that surface is exactly what we are doing today, to figure out where that inner stranger actually comes from.
Yes.
We are diving into some genuinely fascinating source material for this deep dive.
We are.
We're looking at a detailed Hindi transcript and breakdown of Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature.
Right.
And this was narrated by Shyam on the channel Shyam Pustakalaya. What Shyam's breakdown reveals is that this demon isn't a personality flaw.
No, it's not.
And it isn't just bad luck. It is literally a million-year-old biological glitch.
Which is why the mission of this deep dive is so critical for you listening. We are setting out to decode the hidden ancient forces that drive human behavior.
It's not just theory.
Exactly. The goal isn't just to intellectually nod along and say, yes, humans are irrational.
Right. Nobody needs another lecture on that.
The goal is to extract a practical code book from these sources, a set of tools you can actually use to emotionally detach.
To spot toxic patterns before they ruin your week.
Yes, to master your own irrational impulses and ultimately become a much sharper, more empathetic observer of the world around you.
So let's just start with that biological glitch.
Let's do it.
Because the sources trace the origins of our everyday emotions like envy, frustration, or anxiety, all the way back to the physical structure of our brains.
Right.
And the brain didn't just appear fully formed in its current state, right? It evolved in distinct phases.
Correct. To really understand why we act the way we do in a modern office or a modern relationship, you have to look at the triune brain model.
The triune brain, okay.
Yeah, so the human brain essentially developed in 3 overlapping layers over an immense period of evolutionary history.
Like geological layers almost.
Exactly like that. The absolute oldest part, sitting right at the base of the skull, is the reptilian brain.
Okay.
This is the hardware that controls your automatic, non-negotiable survival instincts.
The basic stuff.
Right. It regulates breathing, heart rate, and the immediate thoughtless reflex to jump back if a snake strikes at you.
So there is zero contemplation happening there. You aren't weighing the pros and cons of jumping away from the snake.
None whatsoever. It is pure stimulus and physical response.
Got it.
Now, layered on top of that reptilian core, you have the old mammalian brain.
Which is the limbic system, right?
Exactly, the limbic system. This is the birthplace of emotion. And this is where we really need to reframe how we think about feelings.
How so?
Well, for early social animals, emotions were not poetic, philosophical experiences. They were revolutionary survival tools.
Oh, interesting.
They were literal chemical releases meant to trigger immediate physical action.
Okay, wait, so break that down for me. What does an emotion look like as a pure survival tool? Before humans came along and started writing poetry about it.
Think about a mammal on the savannah millions of years ago.
Okay.
If it detects a predator, it doesn't just think, oh, that's dangerous.
Right.
The limbic system dumps a massive surge of adrenaline and cortisol into the bloodstream. That chemical cocktail is the emotion of fear.
It literally is the fear.
Yes. It is a biological command telling the animal's legs to run or its teeth to bear right this second. The emotion is inseparable from the physical action it demands.
So an emotion is essentially a physical push. It's the body hijacking the steering wheel.
Yes. But then evolution kept going, and we eventually developed the 3rd layer, the newest addition.
The neocortex.
The neocortex. This is the large, wrinkled outer layer of the brain. It is responsible for abstract thought, complex reasoning, self-awareness, and most importantly, language.
Wow. Okay.
It is what allows us to build cities, write code, and, well, have this conversation.
So we have the ancient reptilian reflex, the mammalian chemical emotion, and the human rational thought. I mean, that sounds like a pretty great upgrade.
It is a phenomenal upgrade, but here is the critical flaw, the glitch you mentioned earlier.
Okay, here we go.
These three layers do not speak the same language.
Ah.
The limbic system operates on analog chemical surges. The neocortex operates on digital symbols, language, and logic.
So they're fundamentally incompatible in a way.
Exactly. For modern humans, these ancient physical sensations, the chemical surges of fear, anger, or tribal bonding, are forced to travel up and communicate with our abstract, language-driven neocortex.
I see where this is going. It's like we are trying to run the latest, highly complex software of modern society on millions of years old hardware.
Yes. And the system keeps glitching.
The neocortex is essentially a translator trying to make sense of a chemical dump.
And it constantly mistranslates. The sources describe this as a fundamental translation error.
Translation error.
Right, because the hardware was built to evade predators and survive harsh winters, but now it's trying to process a passive-aggressive Slack message from a coworker.
Or a dip in your stock portfolio.
Exactly.
Let's walk through an example of how that translation error actually plays out in real time. Because if I get mad at an email, I feel like I have a very logical reason for being mad.
Of course you do, because your neocortex is brilliant at making up stories. Let's say a colleague gets a promotion that you wanted. Deep down in your limbic system, a biological surge of envy is released. Now, envy is an incredibly painful, uncomfortable emotion. It implies inferiority. And your ego, your sense of self, does not want to feel inferior.
Right. Acknowledging raw envy feels like admitting defeat.
Exactly. So, as that uncomfortable chemical surge of envy travels up from the limbic system into the neocortex to be processed into conscious thought, your brain alters the translation.
It lies to you.
Basically, it reframes the emotion into something more socially acceptable and ego-protecting. The neocortex takes the raw energy of envy and translates it into righteous anger.
Oh, wow. So I don't tell myself I'm jealous of Dave. I tell myself the promotion process is corrupt, management is blind, and Dave is a total sycophant.
Precisely. You feel a generalized vibrating frustration.
Wow.
And because the original source of the emotion, the raw envy, is hidden from your conscious awareness, the energy just spills out everywhere.
Oh, so that's why you snap at the barista on the way home.
Yeah. Yes. You yell at someone in traffic. You genuinely believe you are reacting to the person cutting you off, but your anger is entirely out of proportion to the event.
The inner stranger takes over. We are basically walking translation errors, hallucinating logical reasons for our ancient chemical spikes.
And because the neocortex is so good at generating those logical-sounding excuses, we live under this persistent, dangerous illusion that we are rational creatures.
We really do think we're logical.
We do. We think our thoughts are arriving independently and objectively, when in reality they're constantly being colored, directed, and hijacked by these ancient emotional currents.
Which brings us directly to the first major law of human nature outlined in the sources, right? The law of irrationality.
Yes, the law of irrationality.
And to really cement how devastating this biological glitch can be on a macro scale, the sources use this massive historical case study. Athens, in the year 432 BC.
It is arguably one of the most perfect historical examples of the neocortex failing to control the limbic system.
Let's set the scene for you listening, because it really paints a picture of what happens when a whole society gets hijacked by emotion.
It's a vivid picture.
Athens is at the height of its power, but it's on the brink of war with its bitter rival, Sparta.
Right.
The governing body of Athens isn't some quiet room of bureaucrats, it's the Athenian assembly. We are talking about 10,000 men gathered outside on a rocky hill called the Pnyx.
And the atmosphere is an absolute powder keg.
Totally.
You have to imagine the emotional contagion in a crowd of 10,000 people. When humans are in large groups facing an existential threat like an impending invasion by a brutal Spartan army, the limbic system entirely takes over.
Nuance dies.
Exactly. The brain craves binary certainty.
Right. And the sources note the assembly was violently divided.
Very violently.
On one side, you had the hawks, who were pulsing with aggressive energy, shouting that Athens must attack Sparta immediately and crush them to show strength.
And on the other side,
you had the doves, who were paralyzed by fear, arguing that they should just surrender to Sparta's demands to avoid their city being burned to the ground.
Aggression or submission. The classic fight-or-flight response, playing out on a geopolitical scale.
Wow.
Now, the typical politicians of the era knew exactly how to play this crowd. They survived by giving highly theatrical, emotionally charged speeches.
Leaning into the glitch.
Exactly. They would validate the crowd's anger to whip them into a frenzy or play on their terrors to manipulate them.
But into this chaotic, screaming mob steps Pericles, the elder statesman of Athens.
Yes, Pericles.
And the sources point out that his approach was the exact opposite of what everyone else was doing. He doesn't try to outshut the crowd.
No, he steps up to the speaker's platform and speaks with tight, restrained, almost cold logic.
Wow.
He intentionally brings the emotional temperature of the entire hill down by refusing to engage with the panic.
And his actual strategic proposal is, well, it's wild to them because it doesn't satisfy either of those limbic urges.
Not at all.
He says, look, if we fight the Spartans on land, we will lose. Their infantry is unbeatable.
Right.
But if we surrender, they will just demand more and more until we are slaves. So we choose a third option.
The hardest option.
Yeah, we retreat behind the massive walls of Athens. We literally let the Spartans march in and burn our surrounding farmland.
Right.
We do not engage them in a glorious land battle. We don't take the bait.
It was a strategy of pure discipline.
He tells them to rely entirely on the Athenian navy. They will use their ships to resupply the walled city from the sea, and they will run minor coastal raids to gently harass Sparta's allies.
Just a war of attrition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Pericles basically tells them, we just outlast them. We do not expand the empire. We sit tight and we bore them into submission.
Now, try to imagine how difficult it is to sell that strategy to a terrified, angry mob.
I mean, it sounds impossible.
It offered absolutely no emotional catharsis. There was no glorious cavalry charge to satisfy the hawks. There was no absolute safety to satisfy the doves.
Well,
it required the Athenians to suppress their egos, watch their ancestral farms burn from the city walls, and essentially do nothing.
But they actually listened to him. Why? Like, how did one guy override the limbic systems of 10,000 panicking men?
Because over decades of public service, Pericles had built an immense reservoir of trust through his unwavering rational demeanor.
Oh, okay.
The people knew he didn't make decisions based on panic or greed. So reluctantly, they agreed to his strategy.
And it worked.
For the first few years of the war, it worked beautifully. The Spartans marched around, burned some fields, got frustrated, and went home. Athens maintained its wealth and power with minimal loss of life.
Until a massive, unpredictable variable shatters everything.
Yes.
Because everyone was packed tightly behind the city walls, an outbreak of plague sweeps through Athens. It's a horrific scene.
Terrible.
A massive portion of the population dies in agony, and among the victims is Pericles himself. The rational anchor is dead.
And this is where the story shifts from a triumph of strategy to a really dark warning about human nature. Because without Pericles to maintain that tight grip on the reins, the city completely lost its collective mind.
The sources outline how quickly they succumbed to their basest emotions. It wasn't just fear anymore. It mutated into unbridled greed, hubris, and aggression.
The worst combination.
Years into this grinding war, long after Pericles is dead, the Athenian assembly comes up with a new idea. The Sicilian expedition.
A classic manifestation of high-grade irrationality.
They decide to send a massive naval fleet to conquer Syracuse, a wealthy city on the island of Sicily, hundreds of miles away.
Right, which had nothing to do with Sparta.
Nothing.
Yep.
It had very little to do with fighting Sparta. It was driven by this blind, contagious optimism.
Yeah.
The sources describe men literally drawing maps of Sicily in the dirt on the streets, dreaming of the gold and slaves they would bring back.
They fell into a fever dream, and here is where the neocortex completely fails.
Yeah.
They had generals who warned them. They had objective data saying this was a terrible idea.
Right. Nicias, one of their most respected commanders, stood up in the assembly and explicitly warned them.
He tried his best.
He said, "We are in the middle of a war with Sparta. Syracuse is massive. The logistics of supplying a fleet that far away are a nightmare. You are vastly underestimating the enemy."
But the crowd's conviction bias was too strong. They didn't want to hear nuance or caution. They wanted the dopamine hit of guaranteed victory.
So Nicias tries a different tactic. He tries a bluff.
A risky move.
He tells the assembly, "Fine, but the force you are proposing is way too small. If we really want to conquer Sicily, we need to double the number of ships empty the treasury, and send thousands more hoplites.
He thought this astronomical price tag would shock them back into reality.
Exactly. And how did the irrational mob respond?
They cheered.
Yes.
Yeah?
They cheered. They said, great idea, Nicias. Take double the ships. Take whatever you need.
It totally backfired.
Completely.
Yeah.
Because the assembly wasn't doing math. They were riding an emotional high. And the result of this fever dream, the entire fleet was trapped in the harbor at Syracuse and completely annihilated.
Tens of thousands of Athenian citizens were killed or sold into slavery.
It effectively broke the back of the Athenian Empire forever.
The contrast between Pericles' disciplined defense and the disaster of the Sicilian expedition is really the core lesson of the law of irrationality.
Yeah, it's night and day.
Pericles was successful because he actively worshipped the intellect. The ancient Greeks had a word for this, nous. He associated this profound rationality with the goddess Athena, who represented clear-sightedness, practical wisdom, and strategy in the heat of battle.
But let me push back on how Pericles actually achieved that.
Sure.
Because the sources mention that he trained himself to never make a decision while experiencing a strong emotion.
Yes, that was his rule.
He would literally lock himself inside his house for days, refusing to speak to anyone until his feelings dissipated and he could hear the voice of Athena, his rational mind. Isn't that just bottling things up? We hear so much today about the dangers of repressing emotions.
Yeah.
If I lock myself in my room every time I get mad at work, I'm going to get fired, or I'm going to eventually explode.
It's a crucial distinction. Repressing an emotion means pretending it doesn't exist. You smile through the anger, and as you said, it eventually explodes.
Right.
What Pericles was doing was not repression, it was active observation. He was creating a quarantine zone.
Quarantine zone.
Yes. He allowed himself to physically feel the anger or the fear, the cortisol, the adrenaline, but he strictly forbid his neocortex from making any strategic decisions while those chemicals were actively surging.
Oh, I see.
He waited for the biological half-life of the emotion to pass.
Okay, so he's letting the chemical wave wash over him, but he's refusing to steer the ship until the water is calm.
Precisely. Rationality is not an innate gift that some people have and others don't. It is a practiced, deliberate skill.
It is a muscle.
Exactly. You have to actively quarantine your emotions before they infect your judgment.
So how does a story about ancient Greek triremes apply to us? Because I'm not deciding whether to invade Syracuse.
No, but the mechanisms are the same.
And the sources make this brilliant direct comparison between the Sicilian expedition and the 2008 global financial crash.
It is the exact same psychological mechanism separated by 2.5 millennia.
Think about it. After the 2008 crash, everybody blamed complex collateralized debt obligations or corrupt rating agencies or asleep at the wheel regulators.
Of course they did, blaming the external.
But the source material argues that at its bedrock, the 2008 crash was just a mass fever dream of greed. It was an emotional bubble where no one wanted to miss out on the easy money.
The maps of Sicily drawn in the dirt were replaced by the mantra, housing prices never go down.
Yes, exactly.
In the years leading up to 2008, you had millions of highly educated individual buyers, sellers, analysts, and bankers making daily decisions.
Art people.
Very smart. And the data was there. The equivalent of Nisus was standing in the room. Anyone could have looked at the reality. People with zero verifiable income were being handed $500,000 mortgages with ballooning interest rates.
The disaster was mathematically inevitable.
But the neocortex hallucinated excuses to justify the limbic system's greed.
Unbelievable.
The most highly educated financial quants in the world succumbed to the exact same irrationality as the Athenian mob.
Because when the dopamine surge of easy wealth infects a group, logic is just discarded.
Completely discarded. When the bubble finally burst, everyone pointed fingers outward. They blamed external villains, the greedy banks, the incompetent government.
But the true villain, the root cause, was human nature itself.
It was the fundamental irrationality that pushes us to believe what we desperately want to believe, rather than what is objectively, provably true.
The Athenians and the 2008 investors fell victim to the exact same cognitive traps. It's actually terrifying to realize that thousands of years apart, with all our technological advancements, the glitches in our hardware are identical.
They haven't changed a bit.
So if we want to avoid drawing maps in the dirt and destroying our own lives, we have to recognize the specific biases that hijack our brains on a daily basis.
To do that, the sources introduce a foundational concept, the pleasure principle. This is the root cause of almost all our daily mental biases.
The pleasure principle. Meaning, at the end of the day, the brain's main goal is just to feel good.
It's deeper than just wanting a piece of chocolate.
Right.
It means that unconsciously, our minds will constantly automatically gravitate toward thoughts, ideas, and memories that soothe our egos and make us feel secure.
Oh, I see.
Conversely, the brain will violently repel or aggressively ignore thoughts that cause us psychological pain, doubt, or feelings of inferiority.
So we walk around believing we are objectively seeking the truth. But most of the time, our brain is just desperately seeking psychological comfort.
So the truth is secondary to feeling safe. Let's look at how this pleasure principle practically mutates into the specific biases the sources talk about.
Okay, let's break them down.
Think about the 2008 crash again. An investor wants to feel smart and secure about buying terrible mortgage bonds. So they engage in the first bias, confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias. We hear about that one a lot.
It is the cornerstone of irrationality. It is the tendency to decide what we want to believe first, usually, because it appeals to our ego or our wallet, and then we go out into the world and actively hunt for the data that proves we are right.
We selectively filter reality.
Exactly. If an article says the housing market is booming, we highlight it. If an article warns of a crash, we immediately find a reason to discredit the author.
And the really insidious part, according to the sources, is that intelligence doesn't protect you from this. In fact, being smart might make it worse.
It often does. A highly intelligent person doesn't use their brain power to seek objective truth.
What do they use it for?
They use their brain power to build more complex, sophisticated rationalizations for the thing they already wanted to do. They are just better at defending their confirmation bias.
So you have confirmation bias, where you only look at data that makes you feel good. But what happens when someone confronts you with opposing data?
This triggers the second bias, conviction bias.
Conviction bias. This one is fascinating because it deals with how we judge the messenger, not the message.
Right. The brain hates uncertainty. Uncertainty triggers the limbic system's fear response.
Okay.
So we tend to believe that if someone speaks loudly, passionately, and with absolute unwavering certainty, they must be telling the truth.
Which perfectly explains why demagogues, cult leaders, and con artists are so successful.
Yes. They know we are starved for certainty,
Right.
So they wrap their half-truths or outright lies in theatrical absolute conviction.
And the flip side is just as dangerous.
Very much so. If an actual expert speaks with nuance, if they say, well, the data is complex and there are gray areas we need to consider, our brain interprets their nuance as weakness or deception.
We mistake emotional intensity for factual accuracy.
Exactly. We would rather follow a passionate fool over a cliff than listen to a cautious expert.
We see that everywhere in modern discourse. Okay, so we're following the loudest person in the room. That leads right into the third trap. Appearance bias, also known as the halo effect.
The halo effect is our brain's desire to simplify complex human beings.
We love a simple story.
We do. It is the unconscious tendency to assume that people who possess one highly visible positive trait, like being physically attractive, exceptionally charismatic, or financially successful, must also possess a host of other positive moral traits.
Right, so we see a billionaire CEO who built a massive tech company, and we automatically assume they must also be a highly ethical, hardworking, fundamentally good person.
We project a halo of goodness onto them. We completely ignore the possibility that they might have reached the top through ruthless, manipulative, or deeply unethical tactics.
The brain wants heroes, so it extrapolates virtue from success.
Which is why the culture is always so genuinely shocked when a beloved, charismatic celebrity is exposed for committing horrific acts behind closed doors.
We confuse their cheekbones and their box office numbers with their actual character.
Precisely. And once we've attached our identity to these charismatic leaders or ideas, the fourth bias kicks in, group bias.
Ah, the comfort of the tribe.
Group bias is the immense, almost narcotic relief we feel when we surrender our individual critical thinking and adopt the opinions of our chosen tribe.
Because for our evolutionary ancestors, standing alone with an unpopular opinion meant being cast out of the tribe.
Which literally meant death by starvation or predators. The fear of social isolation is hardwired into us.
So when we find a group that shares our general worldview, whether it's a political party, a corporate culture, or even a toxic friend group, we unconsciously align all of our other opinions with theirs to ensure we aren't kicked out.
It provides massive emotional security, and it requires zero mental effort.
Yeah.
You don't have to research the nuances of every single complex policy. You just look at what your group believes, and you adopt it wholesale.
You see this in politics to an absurd degree. If I know someone's stance on one highly specific economic issue, I can almost always magically guess their stance on 10 completely unrelated social, environmental, and foreign policy issues.
It's a package deal.
Exactly. Not because those issues are logically connected, but simply because that's the package deal their tribe believes.
And the crucial part of group bias is the denial. If you ask that person, they will swear they arrived at all 10 of those opinions through independent, rigorous, objective thought.
They are completely blind to the invisible pull of the group.
Which brings us to what happens when this entire house of cards collapses.
Right.
When the investment fails, when the charismatic leader is arrested, when the group strategy leads to disaster. The brain has to protect the ego from the pain of failure. Enter the fifth bias, blame bias.
Blame bias. Because when things go horribly wrong, looking inward at our own foolishness, our own greed, or our own laziness violates the pleasure principle.
It hurts too much. So the neocortex immediately pivots outward. We blame our boss, we blame the macroeconomy, we blame Mercury being in retrograde, or we invent shadowy conspiracies working against us.
It's the ultimate defense mechanism.
Yeah.
If it's always someone else's fault, you never have to do the painful work of changing your own behavior.
But the cost is devastating. Blame bias completely prevents you from learning from your failures.
You just repeat them.
Exactly. If you believe your business failed purely because of bad luck, you will start a new business and repeat the exact same errors.
And wrapping all of these biases up in a neat little bow is the sixth and most dangerous illusion: superiority bias.
Superiority bias is the grand optical illusion of the human mind. If you conduct a poll, the vast majority of people will confidently rate themselves as more rational, more ethical, and harder working than the average person.
Which is mathematically impossible.
It is.
It's everyone else is driving like an idiot, but I'm an excellent driver.
Yeah.
Syndrome applied to reality.
Spot on. We can easily spot confirmation bias and tribalism in the other political party. We can clearly see the blame bias in our lazy coworker. But we are entirely blind to it in ourselves.
The superiority bias tells us, yes, human nature is flawed, but I see reality clearly.
And the sources emphasize that all these biases, confirmation, conviction, the halo effect, they create a constant low-grade hum of irrationality.
The daily background noise of bad decision-making.
Right, but there's another level. There's high-grade irrationality.
Yeah.
And this is when the inner stranger doesn't just nudge the steering wheel, they kick you out of the driver's seat entirely.
High-grade irrationality is explosive. It occurs when a specific pressure triggers an emotion so intensely that you become entirely reactive. You lose all perspective.
And the sources point out that these explosive moments almost always trace back to what they call childhood trigger points.
Now, I found this part of the analysis fascinating, but also a bit confusing. The sources say these triggers are unresolved emotional wounds typically formed between the ages of 2 and 5. Why that specific window? 2 to 5 years old is so young.
It is a profound developmental window. Between the ages of 2 and 5, a child is attempting to differentiate from their parents. They are seeking autonomy, learning the word no, but they're still entirely physically reliant on the parents for survival.
Right.
Because their neocortex is barely developed, they do not process the world logically. They process it purely emotionally and chemically.
So an emotional injury in that window hits the raw hardware.
Exactly. If a child in that window experiences a deep sense of abandonment, maybe a parent was physically absent, emotionally unavailable, or highly critical, or conversely, if the child was suffocated and enmeshed by an overbearing parent who didn't allow them to develop a separate identity, it leaves a permanent neurological scar.
Wow.
The amygdala, the fear center of the brain, records that trauma.
But I want to understand the how here. How does a trauma from when I was 3 years old make me lose my temper at a status meeting when I'm 40?
Here is the key mechanism. The amygdala does not have a clock.
It doesn't have a block.
It lacks the concept of linear time. To your conscious mind, 40 years have passed. To your amygdala, the traumatic feeling of abandonment is always fresh.
That is wild.
So let's say a coworker is slightly distant one morning. Maybe they are just stressed about their own mortgage or they didn't sleep well. They give you short, clipped answers.
Completely normal, minor workplace friction.
Right. But if your specific childhood wound was abandonment, your brain might misinterpret their minor distance as a profound existential rejection.
The coworker's sigh perfectly matches the emotional frequency of your absent parent.
The amygdala sounds the alarm.
The boom drop.
Instantly, the 40-year-old professional vanishes. You are neurologically hijacked. Your body reacts as if you are a terrified 3-year-old being abandoned to the wolves.
And the high-grade irrationality takes over.
Yeah.
You don't just ask the coworker if they're okay. You send a blistering, passive-aggressive email copying their manager. You start a rumor. You quit your job. You burn the bridge.
And later, when the cortisol clears, you look at the wreckage and think, why did I do that? That wasn't me.
But it was you. It was a reaction completely disproportionate to the present reality because you were reacting to a ghost from your past.
This is where we need to stop and really hold a mirror up.
Yeah, think about the last time you completely lost your cool. A moment where your reaction was an 11 out of 10, but the actual objective trigger in the room was maybe a 2.
Exactly.
Let me ask you, were you reacting to the person standing in front of you, or were you reacting to a ghost?
Developing the self-awareness to recognize those physical trigger points before you act on them is the only way to short-circuit high-grade irrationality.
And understanding these deep internal emotional deficits is a perfect bridge to the next major concept in the sources.
It is.
Because these early wounds directly dictate how much external validation we demand from the world as adults. Which brings us to the spectrum of self-love and a really clinical, nuanced look at narcissism.
The word narcissist has been severely diluted in modern pop culture.
Oh, totally. We use it to describe someone who takes too many gym selfies or someone who's just a bit selfish in a relationship.
But the sources dive into the clinical developmental roots of narcissism, which is much darker and much more tragic.
Right, and it starts with a biological baseline. We all desperately need attention to survive.
We do.
It's not a character flaw to want attention, it's a hardwired necessity. The sources point out that human infants who are physically fed and kept warm, but who are emotionally ignored, meaning they don't receive eye contact, touch, or active engagement, can actually fall into deep depression, fail to develop properly, and even die.
Attention is literally the oxygen of the social animal. Without it, our nervous system panics.
Wow.
But as we grow out of infancy and into childhood, we face a harsh reality. We realize we cannot command the undivided attention of our parents or the world 247.
Right, people have their own lives.
Yeah.
We are going to experience moments of isolation, rejection, or simply being ignored.
So how does a healthy human survive those moments of being ignored without constantly spiraling into that infant panic?
That's the question.
In healthy psychological development, the child creates a self-image. The sources use a brilliant metaphor for this. An internal thermostat.
An internal thermostat. I love that.
We slowly build a core sense of who we are, our values, our tastes, our achievements, our inherent worth. When the outside world goes cold, when we are alone in a room, or we fail a test, or someone dislikes us, this internal thermostat kicks in.
It generates its own heat.
Exactly. We can self-soothe. We can retreat into our own self-worth, remind ourselves of our value, and feel validated from the inside out. We don't cease to exist just because no one is currently applauding us.
But the sources explain that for deep narcissists, this vital developmental step was ruptured.
Yes. Usually this happens because they were raised by parents who are either deeply narcissistic themselves and treated the child as an annoying burden, or conversely, parents who used the child as a prop for their own ego.
So praising them only when they performed, but never seeing the child's true independent self.
Exactly. And what is the result of that rupture?
It must be devastating.
The result is catastrophic for their inner life. The child never builds that internal thermostat. They have absolutely no internal mechanism to generate self-worth.
Wow.
They are entirely, terrifyingly reliant on the external temperature.
That sounds exhausting.
It is a state of constant survival mode. If people are paying attention to them, praising them, or fearing them, they feel alive, grandiose, and powerful.
But what happens when the attention stops?
The moment the attention stops, they don't just feel a bit lonely. They feel an unbearable, cavernous emptiness. They feel a sense of psychological annihilation.
And the sources break this deep narcissism down into two primary manifestations, right? Extroverted and introverted narcissists. How do they differ in how they hunt for that attention?
Well, the extroverted narcissist is the archetype we easily recognize. Because they lack internal heat, they have to become the sun.
They become the sun.
They become highly dramatic, grandiose, hyper-charismatic. They will suck all the oxygen out of the room. They excel in politics, entertainment, and corporate leadership because they are driven by a manic need to be seen.
But it's a trap, isn't it? because the applause is never enough.
It is a bottomless pit. The moment the crowd leaves, the emptiness returns. So they have to constantly escalate the drama.
They provoke fights, they create crises, they pit employees against each other just to keep the spotlight burning.
Exactly.
So that's the loud, extroverted version. What about the introverted narcissist? Because that seems like an oxymoron. If you need attention to survive, how can you be an introvert?
The introverted narcissist has the exact same gaping internal void, but they lack the social skills, the charisma, or the energy to command a room.
Oh, I see.
So instead of demanding attention from reality, they retreat inward. But they do not retreat into a healthy self-image. They retreat into elaborate, grandiose fantasies of their own unrecognized superiority.
So they sit alone in their apartment, entirely convinced they are misunderstood genius, and the only reason they aren't successful is that the world is too stupid to appreciate them.
Exactly. And because their ego is built entirely on fantasy, it is incredibly fragile. They become exceptionally prickly, bitter, and hypersensitive to any perceived slight.
So if you offer them mild, constructive criticism, they react with vicious, seething resentment because you have punctured their fantasy.
Both types sound incredibly destructive to be around.
Especially when you are dealing with extroverted narcissistic leaders or bosses. They draw you into their orbit, and they use you simply as a mirror to reflect their own greatness.
And the moment you stop reflecting what they want to see, or the moment you outshine them, they turn vicious.
They will destroy you without a second thought, because to them, you are not a separate human being. You are just a tool for regulating their self-esteem.
Which is why understanding narcissism is so vital. But the sources don't just leave us with the diagnosis, they offer the cure.
Thank goodness.
If deep narcissism is the ultimate manifestation of the inner stranger energy directed entirely inward, then the antidote, the pinnacle of emotional maturity, is empathy.
Empathy is energy directed entirely outward. It is the conscious, difficult practice of stepping out of your own ego and attempting to genuinely experience the world through the neurochemistry and historical context of another person.
And the sources provide two incredible historical examples of empathy in action.
The first is the legendary polar explorer Ernest Shackleton.
Shackleton is often studied in business schools for his crisis management, but his real genius was his profound, almost superhuman empathy.
When his ship, the Endurance, was crushed by pack ice in Antarctica in 1915, he was stranded with 27 men in the most brutal, freezing, hopeless conditions on Earth.
They were trapped for nearly 2 years. Survival shouldn't have been possible.
But Shackleton kept every single man alive.
And he did it not through rigid, dictatorial discipline, but through hyper-attunement to his crew.
The sources describe how he would wake up, and just by observing his men during morning tea, he could read their nonverbal cues with staggering accuracy.
A slight slump in a sailor's shoulders, a subtle shift in tone of voice, a hesitation.
He could anticipate exactly who was nearing a psychological breaking point before the man even realized it himself.
He was reading the limbic system of his crew. And instead of calling a man out for being weak, Shackleton would adjust his leadership on the fly.
No.
Well, if a man was depressed, Shackleton might casually ask for his expert advice on a task, giving the man a sense of worth.
Oh, that's brilliant.
If a man was exhausted, Shackleton would arrange for him to get extra hot milk, but he'd do it secretly so it didn't look like charity, which would hurt the man's pride.
He viewed his men not as disposable pawns for his own glory, but as complex, fragile individuals. He pushed his own ego aside and used empathy as a literal survival tool.
But as amazing as Shackleton is, the example that really stopped me in my tracks was the Russian playwright Anton Chekhov.
Oh man, Chekhov's story is a profound masterclass in transforming trauma into radical empathy. Let's really dive into this. Because Chekhov grew up in 19th century Russia in grinding, miserable poverty. His father was a deeply abusive, violent, terrifying alcoholic who would regularly beat Anton and his brothers.
Terrible situation.
Now, standard psychology tells us that a childhood like that breeds immense anger, resentment, and a desire to lash out at the world. You would expect Chekhov to be completely consumed by hatred for his father, and you wouldn't blame him.
A child views an abusive parent as an omnipotent, evil monster. And if Chekhov had maintained that childhood viewpoint, he would have likely been destroyed by bitterness.
Right.
But Chekhov eventually went to university and trained as a medical doctor.
And he applies that cold, hard scientific training to his own family trauma.
Yes. He decided to use the diagnostic lens of a physician to examine his father. He chose to step outside of his own pain, which requires immense emotional strength, and view his father objectively as a patient with a disease.
He imagined the world from his father's broken perspective.
Exactly.
He realized, wait, my father isn't a demon. My father is a man who was literally born into serfdom slavery.
Right.
He was brutally beaten by his own father. He was crushed by the impossible economic pressures of trying to provide for a huge family in a deeply unequal society. He was dealing with his own profound feelings of failure and inadequacy.
And how did the father self-medicate the pain of that existence? With cheap alcohol, which completely destroyed his limbic system and led to the violent outbursts.
So he didn't just hate him.
No, by mapping out this chain of historical, economic, and psychological causes, Chekhov dismantled the monster. He reduced his terrifying father to a flawed, pitiable, tragic human being caught in a cycle he couldn't control.
The sources point out that Chekhov didn't excuse the behavior. He didn't say the abuse was okay.
No, of course not.
But he finally understood the mechanics of it. He saw the broken machinery. And in doing so, Chekhov completely freed himself from the paralyzing toxic hatred that could have ruined his own life and art.
Chekhov famously wrote, "I don't ask the wounded man how he feels. I myself become the wounded man." It is the ultimate expression of the analytical empathy we are trying to achieve.
So if we can channel our inner Chekhov, if we can turn our attention outward and deeply analyze the mechanics of the people around us, we start to notice something else.
We do.
We start to realize that the people we interact with every day aren't just acting randomly. They are constantly, meticulously projecting curated versions of themselves.
Which brings us perfectly to the law of role-playing and the vital necessity of seeing through the illusion of character.
The sources argue that humans are, by our very nature, supreme actors. And this isn't a modern invention of social media. This goes back to our ancestors.
Long before we had language to say, "I come in peace," or "I am the boss," we survived entirely by reading and projecting nonverbal signals.
If an early human couldn't project calm confidence when facing a predator, they were eaten.
If they couldn't project submission when challenged by the dominant leader of the tribe, they were killed. We are neurologically wired to perform for our survival.
Today, we aren't fending off saber-toothed tigers, but the biological mechanism is exactly the same. We wear masks to navigate the complexities of society.
Right. We put on the mask of the deferential employee for the boss. We put on the mask of the fiercely confident leader for our team.
We wear the mask of the deeply pious neighbor.
And because we've been practicing for 1,000,000 years, we are incredibly good at it.
But the critical warning from the sources is this: you must never mistake the mask for the reality.
The mask is merely a social convenience. It is a strategic tool.
The real person, their true underlying character, is hiding beneath that mask. And it is very often suppressing darker desires, deep insecurities, hostility, or chronic laziness.
So the obvious question is, how do I know what's real? If everyone is a world-class actor, how do I tell the difference between someone who is genuinely a good, hardworking person and a manipulative narcissist who is just playing the role of a good person?
Yeah, how do you do that?
You cannot look at how they behave in normal, low-stakes situations. Anyone can hold a smile during a pleasant lunch. Your job as an observer of human nature is to patiently watch for what the sources call leakage.
Leakage. Explain the mechanics of that. How does the mask slip?
Maintaining a false persona requires immense cognitive energy from the neocortex. It is exhausting to constantly pretend to be something you are not.
I can imagine.
When a person experiences sudden stress, fatigue, unexpected frustration, or when they believe they are interacting with someone beneath them who doesn't matter, the neocortex drops its guard.
It's like watching a beautifully produced, highly dramatic movie. The actors are hitting their marks. The lighting is perfect. You are totally immersed in the illusion.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, a grip accidentally drops the boom mic into the frame. The illusion is instantly shattered. For a split second, you are reminded that this is just a set.
That split second of leakage is everything. It might be a momentary flash of absolute contempt on the face of a normally polite coworker.
Or a sudden, vicious, disproportionate outburst of anger over a minor delay.
Or it could be a small, unnecessary lie that they casually brush off.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second. We all have bad days. If I snap at a waiter because I barely slept and my dog is sick, does that mean my true character is an abusive monster?
The sources introduce a really harsh rule here. People never do something just once.
Never do something just once.
It is perhaps the most practical defensive rule in the entire text. It addresses exactly your point. Yes, people have bad days.
Right.
But if you observe someone do something fundamentally manipulative, underhanded, unnecessarily cruel, or exceptionally lazy, and they immediately try to pass it off as an anomaly, like, I was just so tired, that's not who I am, I wasn't thinking, do not believe the excuse.
The boom mic dropped.
Exactly. That action, no matter how brief, was a manifestation of their deeply ingrained character. It is how their hardware is wired.
They have absolutely done it before.
And if given the right pressure and opportunity, they will absolutely do it again.
If a new business partner casually throws a junior employee under the bus to save face on a minor error, they're leaving a blazing trail of clues. They're showing you exactly how they will treat you when the stakes are high.
Once you see the actor break character under stress, you possess the map to their true nature.
By meticulously paying attention to these micro-expressions, this leakage, you can map someone's true character before you bind yourself to them in a business venture, a marriage, or a deep friendship that could ultimately prove disastrous.
Okay, but this creates a massive practical problem.
It does. Let's say I've used my Chekhov empathy, I've watched for the boom mic, and I've successfully mapped someone's true character.
Right.
I know my boss is secretly deeply insecure, highly defensive, and resistant to any new ideas. I know their mask is just blusters, but I still have to work with them.
Yes, you do.
I still need to convince them to approve my project. How do I use this profound psychological insight without triggering a nuclear explosion?
This is the ultimate test of everything we've discussed.
Yeah.
And it brings us to the final major law we need to unpack, the law of defensiveness.
Because if I walk into my boss's office and say, hey, I've analyzed your childhood abandonment triggers and I realize your aggressive mask is slipping, so you should approve my budget, they are going to absolutely lose their minds.
They will destroy you. To understand why, you have to understand the three fundamental pillars of the human ego.
Okay, what are they?
The law of defensiveness states that every single person, no matter who they are, has a desperate psychological need to feel three things. Number one, that they are autonomous, meaning they are in control of their own choices and not being manipulated.
Makes sense.
Number two, that they are intelligent. And number three, that they are inherently good, moral people.
Even the worst people in history think they are the heroes of their own story.
Always. Therefore, if you approach someone and try to force them to change their mind by aggressively arguing with them, lecturing them with facts, or bluntly proving them wrong, you are directly threatening their sense of autonomy and intelligence.
Their limbic system perceives your logic as a physical attack on their ego.
And the defensive walls slam down instantly. They dig in their heels. They will irrationally cling to their bad idea just to prove they are independent and smart.
So brute intellectual force never works. The art of influence, according to the sources, is never about proving how smart you are. It is about making the other person feel like the brilliant new idea was actually theirs all along.
You have to actively lower their defenses first. And the historical masterclass in this technique comes from ancient Greece again. We look to Socrates.
The story of Socrates and the Oracle of Delphi is the perfect illustration of this. Let's walk through it. A friend of Socrates goes to the oracle, which the Greeks believe spoke the literal truth of the gods, and asks a simple question. Is there anyone in Athens wiser than Socrates?
And the oracle replies, no, Socrates is the wisest of all.
Now, for most men, that would be the ultimate ego boost. They would carve it in stone and use it to demand obedience.
But Socrates is genuinely confused. He looks at his own mind and thinks, I know so little, how can I be the wisest? So he decides to scientifically test the oracle's claim.
He goes out into the streets of Athens and starts talking to the politicians, the famous poets, the master craftsmen, the people society universally considers to be the experts.
And what he discovers is the law of irrationality in full effect.
Right. He finds that while a master shoemaker might know everything about making shoes, or a politician might know how to pass a tax law, they are infected with superiority bias.
Because they are experts in one narrow field, they confidently claim to know the absolute truth about massive, complex philosophical matters like the nature of justice, the will of the gods, or the meaning of virtue.
In reality, they know nothing about those things. They are completely blinded by their own arrogance.
And this leads to Socrates' profound realization. He realizes the oracle was right. He is the wisest man in Athens precisely because he is the only man who freely admits his own ignorance.
The famous paradox, I know that I know nothing. But it's not just a cool philosophical quote, it's how he weaponized that realization that matters to us.
Exactly. Socrates wanted to change the minds of these arrogant politicians. But he knew the law of defensiveness. He knew that if he walked up to a powerful general and said, "Your concept of justice is logically flawed and you are a fool," the general would simply have him exiled or beaten.
So he assumed a completely different mask. He adopted the role of the naive, humble, endlessly curious inquirer.
The birth of the Socratic method. Let's role-play this so we can see how it actually bypasses the ego. Let's say I'm an arrogant politician proposing a terrible, aggressive law, and you are Socrates.
Okay, I wouldn't attack your law. I would approach you with relaxed, non-threatening energy and say, "My friend, you are a respected leader, and I am just a humble citizen who struggles to understand these complex matters. Can you help me? How exactly will this new law lead to a more just society for the poor?"
As the arrogant politician, my defenses immediately drop. I don't feel attacked. I feel flattered. My ego is stroked. I'm thinking, this poor simple man needs my brilliant guidance.
So you open up. You confidently start explaining your terrible logic to me.
And you listen intently. You validate my intelligence. But then you ask another gentle, probing question based on what I just said.
That is fascinating. But earlier you said justice requires fairness for all. If this law seizes the property of the merchants, how does that align with your brilliant definition of fairness?
Oh, wow. I'm suddenly trapped by my own words. But because you are asking it so gently, I can't get mad at you. I have to wrestle with the contradiction myself.
Slowly, question by question, you guide them down a path where they are forced to see the logical holes in their own argument.
The genius of it is that I realize my own foolishness without you ever having to call me a fool. I feel like I am discovering the truth on my own, which preserves my autonomy and my intelligence.
It is the ultimate psychological disarming tool.
Socratic humility requires you to suppress your own ego. You have to give up the short-term pleasure of proving you are right in order to achieve the long-term goal of actually changing the person's mind.
It is about energy. If you approach someone with the tense, aggressive energy of a debater trying to win, their limbic system will fight back. If you approach them with the relaxed, deeply interested energy of someone trying to understand, their limbic system softens.
This connects beautifully to a metaphor from the text that I absolutely love, and it really serves as the blueprint for everything we've talked about today, the rider and the horse.
Yes, the rider and the horse. It perfectly encapsulates the biological glitch we started with and the balance we were trying to achieve.
So imagine your entire mind, your total being. The rider sitting in the saddle represents your neocortex, your intellect, your conscious thought, your inner Pericles, your capacity for logic.
The Sandquare.
The massive muscular horse beneath the rider represents your limbic system and reptilian brain, your raw emotional energy, your passions, your fears, your drive.
The hardware. And most people live their entire lives with the horse in total control.
The emotions run wild, sprinting toward whatever feels good or bolting from whatever causes pain. The rider's just dragging helplessly along behind, desperately trying to invent logical-sounding excuses for wherever the horse has already decided to go.
That is the Athenian mob launching the Sicilian expedition. That is the investor buying a terrible mortgage in 2007. The inner stranger is driving.
But the sources point out that the opposite extreme is also terrible. You don't want a rider who violently chokes the horse.
Right. A person who represses every single emotion, who lives in a state of cold, robotic calculation, is paralyzed.
A horse that is beaten and choked by fear won't take you anywhere. You lose all your passion, your creativity, your drive to connect.
What you need is synergy. The ideal state is where the rider holds the reins firmly but gently. The rider, your intellect, surveys the landscape, creates the strategy, and dictates the ultimate direction.
But the rider absolutely relies on the horse for the raw power, the momentum, and the energy to make the journey.
You don't peel the emotion, you harness it.
Yeah.
You use the raw energy of Socratic curiosity as the fuel to deeply understand your toxic coworker, rather than letting the raw energy of anger force you to send a fiery email that ruins your career.
You get the ancient hardware and the modern software finally working together. That synergy is the definition of human flourishing.
Okay, let's take a breath and unpack this entire journey because we have covered incredible life-changing ground today.
We really have.
We started by dismantling the myth of our own rationality. We realized that we are running ancient, glitchy hardware, creating translation errors that cause our emotions to hijack our logic.
We observed the devastating consequences of the law of irrationality, seeing how unchecked emotion and cognitive biases, from confirmation to superiority bias, can destroy an empire or a global economy just as easily as they can destroy a personal relationship.
We looked at the terrifying spectrum of deep narcissism, realizing the absolute necessity of building our own internal thermostat for self-worth so we don't bleed out when the world ignores us.
We found the cure for the inner stranger in Chekhov-level empathy, the radical, difficult choice to view even those who hurt us as complex, flawed humans reacting to their own history, rather than as monsters.
We learned the defensive art of seeing through the social masks people wear, patiently waiting for the boom mic to drop, looking for the leakage that reveals their true, unalterable character.
And finally, we explored how to navigate this complex world of fragile egos without triggering defensiveness, using Socratic humility to gently guide the rider and the horse.
By mastering these laws, we can stop being victims of human nature. We can channel our inner Athena. We can become sharper, calmer, and infinitely more strategic.
It is a profound, permanent shift in how you view reality.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought drawn straight from the introduction to the source material. It's a mental model that beautifully ties all of this chaos together.
Imagine treating the most irritating, toxic, dramatic, or baffling people in your life not as personal attackers trying to ruin your day.
Remove your ego from the equation entirely. Instead, imagine you are a meteorologist. You are a scientist out in the field, and you suddenly stumble upon a bizarre, highly unusual, and somewhat jagged new rock formation.
You don't get angry at the rock for being jagged. You don't take its sharp edges personally. You don't yell at it and demand that it become a smooth pebble.
Exactly. You observe it with pure, detached fascination. You study its composition. You say to yourself, how fascinating that these specific historical pressures, these chemical elements, and this precise environment combined over time to create this exact jagged shape.
So the provocative question to mull over as you go back into the world is this. How much of your daily stress, your grinding anxiety, and your explosive anger would instantly vanish if you stopped taking human nature personally and simply started observing it?
If you can master that level of observation, the inner stranger loses all its power.